Around the clock, sports all the time. That's never going to work. That's ridiculous.
Just remember to have fun out there today. And if you lose, I'll kill you.
This is Tall Can Audio.
Seriously, this thing is going to be a cultural disaster.
Away we go, good listener, on a Thursday edition of the Tall Can Audio podcast. Matt Robinson with you in the TCA studio in beautiful Bytown, Canada. We are on social media at Tall Can Audio. Give us a follow there and make sure you are subscribed to the podcast. Well, wherever you're hearing me right now. Look, a couple of different things to talk about here today. Both of them kind of sports media related as opposed to sports related. As you guys know, I'm kind of a nerd for that sort of thing. If you're more looking for the sports talk itself, I would recommend you go back to Tuesday. If you missed it, Rob and I back in studio for the first time talking about the beginning of the NFL season, which kicks off later tonight. Connor McDavid, Mitch Marner, the Blue Jays bullpen, all kinds of stuff there. And something a little more up to date, dropping on Friday morning. Our buddy Andrew Stoughton from the batflip.ca will be here on the show to try and settle you down. And if not you, then settle me down. What has gone on with the pitching staff? What does lie ahead for George Springer and Bo Bichette? Would you sign Mark Shapiro back up? John Schneider, have you seen enough? All of that we'll get into on Friday morning. I can promise you, because I've already asked him those questions. It's been recorded. That'll drop Friday morning. The batflip.ca's Andrew Stoughton. We look forward to that. We always get a little boost when Stoughton comes on. Guy knows his Blue Jays. Hope you're looking forward to that one. Look, I thought about doing this on Wednesday afternoon when the news became official, but decided to just let it breathe a little bit. But that is the news that, well, Dean Brown and Gord Wilson of the Ottawa Senators radio broadcast team won't travel with the team this year. And those of you who have been hanging around here throughout the summer will note that that sounds a little familiar. And I don't know how big of a deal to make out of this, but it should be pointed out because I took a bit of a beating over this. On August 15th, I put out an episode of the show saying, hey, I'm hearing these guys aren't going to travel with the team. And it's out there now. You can check it out for yourself at tallcanaudio.com or wherever you're hearing me right now. It says, what's up with the Ottawa Senators radio rights? And that was on the day that the team had announced a new French language radio broadcast deal, but nothing about a new English rights deal. And most people in this market are familiar with the fact that TSN 1200 and the Ottawa Senators are entering their last year of a 12-year contract, and people aren't really sure what's going to happen from here. But I said on that show on August 15th, I'm hearing that Dean and Gord are not going to travel with the team this year. I did say nothing was carved in stone at the time. You guys know, nothing that happens on this show is about being first to report things. We're not insiders. Well, it's a lot like what I say when we talk about beers, when we have different brewers? When we have different brewers in here. I'm not an expert. I'm an enthusiast. That's the way I feel about my sports. And listen, I think that's the way a lot of you feel about your sports. If you're sitting here listening to a sports talk podcast, you are an enthusiast. Maybe you're also an expert. I'm not going to judge you. You can decide that for yourself. But you're certainly an enthusiast if you're listening to a program like this. And that's the way I feel about a lot of the sports stuff we follow here, a lot of the sports talk, sports media stuff we follow here, and certainly the beer stuff that we talk about here. I'm an enthusiast. I'm not an insider. I'm not an expert. But I had heard from enough places, I'd been asked from enough other places, hey, what are you hearing? That you start to piece some things together. And it's the middle of August, and all the real insiders are still feet up somewhere else. although I was still feet up somewhere else. You just go, I've got this from enough people that at that time, I'd been told they weren't going to travel. And I was a little hesitant to put a hard stamp on it because it was August 15th. And with a month and a half to go before the NHL season starts, maybe Bell Media and the Ottawa Senators come to a different agreement that, it never becomes public that there was any kind of contention about it or any doubt about it. And all of a sudden I look like a dumbass because they're just off and traveling and it's never made any news. So you try to be careful about it. But I was pretty certain, based on the people I'd been speaking to, that this is exactly how this was going to play out. So on Wednesday, Graham Nichols from the Hockey News is able to make it official. And that guy's as plugged in at this point as anybody. He's been covering the team for quite a while. Whether it was under the 6th Sens banner, Roman a Day, he had his own blog. This guy knows some things. He's plugged in. It's not just following analytics. This guy has connections himself, and he's able to report on Wednesday and make it official and get a statement from the team that says, yeah, Dean and Gord are not going to travel with the Sens this year for road games. And there was a rather unusual, I'd sort of heard the same. I think a lot of people were sort of vaguely familiar, but Graham Nichols is the one who got the specifics out of it and put it up at thehockeynews.com, was that the team was the one paying the per diem and paying for the hotel room for the radio guys to travel. And not just one. I believe they had their own rooms. These are grown men. Not looking for a roommate situation. But it was made pretty familiar and pretty public knowledge for a while that TSN 1200 and Bell Media were not paying for Dean and Gord to travel commercial. In fact, John Rodenberg, the program director from TSN 1200, was on this show a few years ago and said that one of the main reasons that they were but financially able to continue to travel their broadcast team was that they were allowed on the team flight, the team charter. So Dean and Gord flew with the team. That's a huge savings. But even beyond that, Graham Nichols was able to make official what many of us had heard for a while, and that was that it was actually the team that was paying for the hotel rooms and the per diem, so you can afford to eat on the road, which is important to a broadcaster. It's important to a lot of people. Broadcasters are no different. They'd like to eat while they're out on the road. And it sounds like it was no more complicated this year than the fact that the team said, we don't really want to pay for that anymore. The charter seat doesn't cost them anything. The plane is going there anyway. You can put the guys on there. But we don't really want to pay for the per diem and the hotel rooms anymore. So they go to Bell Media with 1 year left on this contract and say, we'd like to undo this. And the easy question for Sens fans becomes, well, didn't you have a contract? Didn't you sign for this? So why wouldn't Bell Media and TSN 1200 say, no, we have a contract? I think the optimistic view is that you're trying to be a good broadcast partner. This deal is up at the end of the year. We don't know what that's going. A lot of people think that this contract, the Ottawa Senators and the TSN 1200 radio contract, is kind of floating TSN 1200 right now. And when that contract ends at the end of this hockey season, that may be the end of TSN 1200. We don't know that, but that has been in the water for quite a while. In the air for quite a while. Whether you prefer to breathe it in or drink it in. There's been some talk that TSN 1200 is in trouble at the end of this radio contract. So maybe Bell Media is saying, hey, we get it. We're not going to ask you to pay for our guys to go on the road. We'll keep them in studio. That'll save you some money. And when we go to renegotiate next year, you'll remember that we did you this favor and let you off the hook for that obligation. And that's certainly a possibility. That could be what's happened. It could also be that Bell Media knows, as well as the Senators know, we're done here, right? Like at the end of this contract, we're not planning to re-up this. We don't want to fight about it. Let's just run it out. It could be somewhere in between. But these are the extremes that we're talking about here. As I mentioned on that August 15th episode of the show, the Senators and TSN 1200 being unable to reach a new contract at the end of this 2025-2026 season does not necessarily mean the end of a Bell Media and Ottawa Senators relationship. It's possible that Bell Media would let TSN 1200 follow, well, I was going to say follow the model. It's a gross way to say it. But Bell Media has shuttered the TSN radio stations in Vancouver and Winnipeg and Hamilton, and not long after that in Edmonton. And so they could allow TSN 1200 to go under. Bell Media, this is, not the Senators. And then move the Sens to 580 CFRA, which is actually where they were in the very beginning of their existence back in 92, 93. Before 1200 became an all-sports radio station and they moved over there. So you could move the Sens to 580 CFRA and Bell Media would still, own the contract. But it's not great for the Senators. And I don't want to go too far back down this road because I covered it on that episode. And if you missed it, check it out at tallcanaudio.com or on your favorite podcast app. It was on August 15th. It's titled, What's Up with the Ottawa Senators Radio Rights? And look, if you're on 580 CFRA, it's talk radio. And look, they'll give you 7 to 10 p.m. Frankly, most talk radio stations across Canada don't have original programming at that time of night. So you could run the Sens there. But the idea that 580 CFRA would spend all day talking about the Sens like TSN 1200 does is where it becomes problematic. You don't have that strong lead in. You don't have a radio station that's doing nothing but propping you up and talking about you all day. So there's a bit of a give and take here for the radio station and for the team. But right now, what Graham Nichols reported on Wednesday was making it official. Yeah, these guys aren't going to travel. And if you're looking at projecting what that means, where are we going? It's not a good sign. The team doesn't want to pay for it anymore. They went back to the radio station and said, do you want to pay for it? And the radio station also said no. So you're going to have Dean and Gord broadcast from the Byward Market off a TV screen. And look, I can tell you, good Sens fan, as a Leaf fan myself, it stinks when your radio guys are calling games off TV. You can kind of get away with it a little bit. And I know that TSN 1200 likes to make fun of Joe Bowen. And maybe you don't like Joe Bowen, and that's fine. But he is an enthusiastic homer of a broadcaster. And I don't say that as a criticism. If you're calling Saturday night, hockey night in Canada nationwide, you can't be a fucking homer. If you are on the radio in your own home market, you should be a homer. The only people listening to you right now are people who are cheering for the team that you call. To me, Joe Bowen does just fine with that. You would hate, and I would understand, if Joe Bowen was the main event guy on Saturday nights, calling Leaf games against the Sens or whatever. You'd have a beef to pick. No. Anyway, it doesn't work that way regionally. But Joe Bowen and Jim Ralph are sitting in a fucking radio station watching on TV calling the games. And it is impossible for someone even as excitable as Joe Bowen to find that excitement in an empty goddamn room. I know I'm speaking to at least a certain percentage of you who, when your favorite team is playing a must-win to make the playoffs or a Game 7, you don't want to be around people. You want to be in an empty room. And maybe you can find that excitement. Maybe you're biting your fingernails. Maybe you do jump up and yell. But a lot of people just sit there quietly stewing. Is it just me? I sit there quietly stewing by myself. It's hard to find the excitement of that arena, even if it's your team getting scored on and the opposing fans are going crazy. There's energy in that. And you don't get it sitting in an office watching the game on a big screen television. We all heard that through the pandemic. Everybody did their best because they had to. It was a medical necessity or whatever. You know, we all did it. We got used to our, home team broadcast teams. When guys traveled, the thing that stands out to me the most is the Blue Jays. And Dan Schulman would be sitting in a studio at the Fan 590 doing both radio and television off TV because he couldn't travel to the U.S. Well, he could, but he'd have to stay down there for 3 weeks in quarantine and whatever else. These are the sorts of things we're talking about right now. And so the Leafs have had their radio team sitting at home for years now. And it's disgusting. It's gross. In 2023, the Leafs beat the Tampa Bay Lightning to advance out of the first round for the first time in, 117 years. John Tavares scores the goal. But Joe Bowen is stuck at home watching on TV, and TV gave him a bad shot, and he thinks it's Morgan Riley that scored. So not only does he go, Morgan Riley scores, he's like, Mo.
Back into the corner for Nyes. Nyes back in the net for Tavares. Tavares coming out, sends it in a goal. They score! They score! Holy mackerel, they score! Morgan Riley! Mo Riley! The Leafs have won it! They're going to the second round!
And I get it. It's easy to make fun of Joe Bowen right now. But that could be your team. At any point this season in overtime. Because your guy wasn't able to look up the ice or wasn't able to see a change that just came off the bench. He's stuck watching it on TV like you. And it ruins a big moment. So this is disappointing. Not just because Dean and Gord are no longer on the road, but because not being on the road forces them into a worse call. And they're both very talented guys. But it's harder to do the job. And all those little stories, all those little anecdotes that they're able to throw into a broadcast come from running into an assistant coach or a third line player or whatever at Starbucks or in the lobby of the hotel or what, and they're just not going to be there now. They're just not going to be there to tell that story. So look, it sucks. But this is where we're going. And it sort of forces you to ask the question, what's better? The team owning the broadcast, which is happening more and more. We will own the broadcast rights ourselves and outsource them. Or just not having you around at all. Like, let's say Dean and Gord work for the Senators. And now they're at every game. But you're not going to say anything overly critical because you work for the team now, not a broadcaster that covers the team. Or would you rather have this broadcast team who's free to criticize the team and is free to talk about what they're hearing, but they're kept at arm's length? They don't have the same grasp on it that they would have in previous years. It's tough. For like right now, as Graham Nichols mentioned in his piece, the St. Louis Blues have let go their TV crew, and they're moving to an all-in-one package. They will have their radio guys do both TV and radio. And it doesn't really work the other way. I mentioned Dan Schulman a little while ago. He was on the show during the pandemic, and he mentioned how difficult it was as a TV guy to be aware that you're suddenly being simulcast on radio. Because if he misses a pitch that's up and away, or just a simple ground out to third that gets thrown across to first and whatever, it's not the end of the world on TV, because you can see it for yourself while they're having whatever conversation they're having. On radio, I need you to tell me that just happened. So the Blues have gone in that direction. Instead of keeping their TV crew to do both, they've kept their radio crew to do both, under the assumption that the radio guys will call a more descriptive game. But it's not great for anybody. This is the direction that we're all headed in. The cheaper, the better. And without going down the same road that I went down on that August 15th show, it's not a good sign for those of us who like sports talk radio in the nation's capital. This is another chipping away at what it is they do and what they contribute, so that at the end of next season, whenever that may be, after the regular season, after the first round, the second, third round, however far the Sens go, at the end of that, there will be a conversation about the future of TSN 1200, and they have just taken away one more thing and softened the blow, in theory, for you. Which sounds counterintuitive, but if you've gotten used to, all right, I've seen Dean and Gord call the year now from the radio station. I've gotten used to a lesser broadcast, a cheaper broadcast. Well, I guess I could be talked into a 580 CFRA broadcast, which doesn't have the 90-minute pregame, the 90-minute postgame, the all-day lead-up. You just sort of get used to settling. And maybe that's what this is. We'll see. I'm not a popular guy right now talking about Bell Media. Like I said, we're not a news-breaking show. We're not an insider show. But as far as I'm aware, we were the first show to mention that the radio guys were not going to travel this year on August 15th. And I got some messages, got some blowback. So we'll see. Some of you may have noticed that over the weekend, I teed up a guest who was going to be on the show this week. And if you heard me say that, I guess, no, you didn't. It's not here this week. Am I being slapped on the wrist? Am I being warned a little? I don't know. But we're going to keep doing this because this is what we do. Those guys over there at TSN 1200 and 580 CFRA, the on-air talent, they're fantastic guys. And they have lent their support to this show for a very long time. But they've all got bosses. We know how this rolls. So we'll see how this impacts us moving forward. But like I said, I'm sure some of you were expecting a certain guest this week who, he wasn't here. There's a little cat and mouse. The other thing that has gone off this week as it pertains to Canadian sports talk radio was Overdrive down in Toronto. Now, as a lot of people on Twitter are putting it, those guys claim to have expanded by dropping an hour. I'll say up front, I'm only sort of in on Overdrive. Now, I certainly recognize that it is currently the biggest sports talk program. I was going to say presentation, as Bob McCowan would have once called it. Although probably not to his competition. They are a big deal across Canada. But I'm only sort of half in on it. I certainly recognize the appeal. Their ratings speak for themselves. They're very popular. I think Brian Hayes is a terrific host. I think you're going to see him become more and more, not quite James Duthie, but become a bigger deal across TSN. Jamie McLennan, very involved in both the Senators and the Habs broadcasts. Jeff O'Neill is I get Jeff O'Neill's appeal, but he bugs me just because it's sort of on the on a talk show like that, he's sort of appealing to the lowest common denominator. That's just like, I don't know, like, the penalty kill sucks. Why didn't you just go out and get another? Because you're up against the cap. Like, it's still a very throwaway, you and your buddies in the backyard in 2003, before there was a salary cap, just talking about, just pay him whatever it takes and get it done. It doesn't work like that anymore. And I get that Jeff O'Neill, as the everyman, has his appeal that way, but it bugs me as someone who understands that's just not the way the sports world works anymore. Point being, there are moments of Overdrive that I like, and moments that I just don't. So Bell Media announces on Wednesday, after you're already back for a day from Labor Day, that they are cutting down Overdrive from 3 hours to 2 hours. Instead of going 4 p.m. to 7 p.m., it's now 4 p.m. to 6 p.m. You probably could have talked me into it if that meant that you were going to do a 1 hour lead up to whatever was going on that day. I mentioned while we were talking about the Sens and what might be about to happen if TSN 1200 were to disappear. The Sens have a 90-minute pregame show most games. The Leafs don't have 30 most days, because Sportsnet 590 The Fan and TSN 1050 want to go toe-to-toe with their afternoon drive show up until 7 p.m. So at 7, and look, neither one of those outlets has a good pre- or post-game presentation anyway, so it's not like you're missing out on much. But if you had said to me, TSN 1050 is going to put Overdrive on the sideline so that the Leafs could have a 60-minute pregame show on the nights that it's on their airwaves, I'd have at least understood what you were trying to do. But that's not what they're going to do. They're going to immediately replay what's happened between 4 p.m. and 6 p.m. And it's just not a good enough show that I need to have replayed for me within an hour of when it initially happened, whatever you just did. And look, it's most talk radio stations do something like this. Like, we've heard it a bunch of times. The JR and Lloydie here in Ottawa have a good interview with, let's say, Michael Andlauer at 9:10 a.m. And the afternoon show runs it back. That's 6 hours later. Maybe not everybody listens all day. So you catch the people on the afternoon drive who didn't catch it in the morning. That's fine. You can't interview someone at 5:05 and run it back at 6:25 and expect a different audience. If Overdrive is your big showpiece nationwide, and we'll get to this in a second because this is what they're trying to paint it as, you don't cut it. You don't shrink it down. I understand the logistics, because often Jamie McLennan is not available, not just from 6 to 7 p.m., but if he's not available at all because he's here in Ottawa doing a Sens game or in Montreal doing a Habs game. So they have somebody else sit in. It's often Jonas Siegel or Frank Corrado. And often in the third hour, Jeff O'Neill has to disappear because he's going to go do panel work to tee up that night's regional Leafs game. So it's not like I don't understand the logistical issues, but create something else. Do a Leaf pregame show. Do a best of the day, not just best of Overdrive. Do something. But to just be like, we're going to have these guys broadcast from 4 to 6, and then from 6 to 7, we'll replay whatever was best from 50 minutes ago? Lame. And I'll tell you what it says to me. Because they keep calling this, and TSN PR put this out, the expansion of Overdrive. And they're claiming it's an expansion because every now and then, like next Friday night, Overdrive will broadcast live from BMO Field ahead of Friday Night Football in the Toronto Argonauts. Do you give a shit what Jeff O'Neill thinks about tonight's Argo game? These guys have a... And look, Brian Hayes is a well-rounded broadcaster. He knows his baseball. He's got a decent handle on the CFL, a really good handle on the NFL. But otherwise, we're just talking about these guys. And look, you know what this show is. Sit down, have a beer, and talk about sports from your perspective. I got no beef with that. But don't try and tell me that Overdrive has expanded because I get to hear Jamie McLennan's takes on the Argos. He'll be the first to tell you. Pretty casual viewer of the CFL. Even in the press, and it's funny. It's not just Overdrive. It's Overdrive presented by FanDuel. And look, Overdrive is far from the only program, only outlet that is leaning too heavily into the sports betting thing. But even in the press release, as you're reading it, every time they mention Overdrive, you know, Toronto sports fans love Overdrive presented by FanDuel. Like, even in writing, every time it goes through, fuck, you just make me resent it so much. Tonight on Overdrive, presented by FanDuel. I get that's the way the world works now, but you're putting it in writing every single time you mention Overdrive in the press release? Don't expect me to call it that. When Steve McLean's been on this show, I've said to him a bunch of times, you know, it's supposed to be the MasterCard Memorial Cup. Fuck off. It's the Memorial Cup. The broadcast has to say MasterCard. The logo has to say MasterCard. I don't have to say MasterCard. So expecting fans to be like that, this is FanDuel Overdrive, piss off. The way they're trying to justify this as an expansion is the occasional visit to a CFL game. They say a clip or two that will be played during SportsCenter, which they already do. The 6 p.m. SportsCenter, you've watched before. It's not every day, but now and then they drop in a panel clip from something that's already happened on Overdrive. They're trying to sell you that this is somehow an expansion when clearly this is a cutback from a network that is getting less and less. Look, Overdrive is their biggest show across the country. If they're not willing to continue to produce it for 3 hours, that should tell you all you need to know about what's coming here in Ottawa, about what's coming in Montreal. They are trimming this back as hard as they can. And they are going to try and paint Overdrive for you as just, well, wherever we were going to use them anyway. We could have them on air from 6 p.m. till 7 p.m., or we could have them record something from 6 until 6:08 p.m. and just put it in SportsCenter. It's cheaper than having extra producers around for an extra hour, extra airtime on what it's just. It's getting embarrassing, it's getting sad, and it's getting painfully transparent how bad they want out of this. I don't have any interest in what these guys have to say ahead of a CFL game. TSN has a vested interest. They're the broadcast partner, and they do a good job with it. Are these guys big CFL guys? No, their value is in their banter. And I get I find it tedious sometimes, but I see why people enjoy it. Just because I don't doesn't mean it doesn't have value. And so now you're going to clip that away and give them 2 hours to run their clips. You know, they've got different segments that they're used to running. And I think you're going to take away some of the charm that is just free-flowing talk radio between the three of them. And you're going to force them quickly. We have to get to this, or we have to get to that, or this segment, or this sponsored whatever. Because you've taken an hour away from them. And you're going to try and pretend that it's better for listeners. That they can listen to the same thing from 6 to 7 that was just on from 4 to 6. Bell Media, man, they're showing you their cards. They're tapping out on this. It's ugly. And perhaps, like, worst of all, like, to me, there was a segment before Ray Ferraro moved to ESPN full-time. He was on Overdrive every day at 5 o'clock. That was can't miss. And sometimes you'll get me to stick around after that. Not every day, because like I said, I have my limit on these guys. But I will be there every single day during the hockey season at 5 p.m. to hear Ray Ferraro interact with those guys. And he'll crack some jokes. They'll talk some golf. They'll talk about whatever else has gone on. But Ray was tremendous, and that was a can't miss segment. And now in the press release, I don't want to shit on this guy any further than I already have. You guys know I don't like Luke Wilson. But everybody but me does. So I get that. They lead with that in the press release. Every Monday, you know, regular segments with Luke Wilson. Cool, I get that. And NHL talk with Jason Strudwick. Jason Strudwick? I get it. That's your buddy. That's somebody they like to talk to. That is not a marquee thing. That's not something you advertise. Jason Strudwick, are you kidding? It's just a guy. It's just one of their friends. And when you're trying to advertise names to sell that this is an expansion, this is a good thing for Overdrive, there's two names. Luke Wilson, people love. Great. Jason Strudwick, crickets. They are 3 years. Bell Media will be out of the sports talk business. They own the half of the... Well, they don't even own anymore. But Bell Media owned half of the Leafs. So they got half of the Leafs, you know, radio rights, TV rights, interview rights, all of that. They sold their half of MLSE to Rogers, but did work into that contract. Hey, you owe us 10 years of Leaf shit. So maybe it carries on longer than I think it does. But this shit is circling the bowl. And it is not the fault of any of the talent. It's not the fault of the people currently on air at TSN 1200. It's not the fault of the people on air in Montreal at 690. 960? 690? I don't know. I don't listen much. And it's not the fault of the people on air at TSN 1050. Bell Media is showing you their cards. We're done. We're out. As long as this takes, we'll let it run its course, but we're tapping out on this. Look, even if you circle back to the Sens part of it, all right, they don't want to cover your hotel room and your per diem anymore. It doesn't cost them a dime to let Dean and Gord on the plane. Can Bell Media then pick up what's left? Like, the travel is the biggest part of it, all these flights. Doesn't cost the Sens anything to let those guys on the plane and then just pick up, you know, maybe it's not the 5-star hotel that the team is staying at, but a different hotel. Could you just do that? Nah. All right, you got this hit show, Overdrive. It's 3 hours a day, and people seem to really like it. You want to keep that going? Nah. Cut it back to 2. It sucks, but if you can't see where this is going, that's on you. And if we struggle to get Bell Media guests here moving forward, and you don't understand why, that's on you as well. It's a little on me, too. But, look, it's a sad state of affairs. Shout out to Graham Nichols, who got everybody on the record about it this week. It's something I'd been hearing for a while and put out there, but he was the one who got them to confirm. It's all out there now. And yeah, Jason Strudwick. That's where the Toronto outlet is putting their chips, hoping that'll get people excited. Ugh. Andrew Stoughton on the podcast tomorrow. We'll talk Blue Jays with him. What's going on? What's real? What isn't? Why are they making me so fucking cranky? We'll see if he can sort that out for us. And then that'll be it for the week. So stay tuned for Stoughton on Friday, and then Rob and I will be back at it here on Monday morning. Thank you so much for checking this one out. More of a rant than anything else. My name is Matt Robinson. Hope you, if not enjoyed it, tolerated it, and we'll see you tomorrow.
I've got nothing here. You're giving me baseball and hockey, and I got my keister blowing in the wind. That made to look like a fool here. That's just dumb. I don't want anything to do with this place. This place is run by a bunch of children.